I was sitting in the kitchen, my bowl of chicken soup already cold, when my son called. "Dad, we moved 5 weeks ago. I forgot to tell you." His voice was calm in a way that scared me, like he had practiced that sentence too many times. I didn't sleep that night. At exactly 7 a.m., I stood outside their old apartment waiting for the manager to unlock the door. When the lock clicked open, the place felt empty enough to freeze my blood. And right then, I knew what they left behind was the most dangerous thing of all. I appreciate you choosing to spend your time here with me. One small thing before we start: drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that it never crossed your mind to question them? Yes or no? I'd really like to know. A few details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes. The message behind it, though, that part is real. The phone buzzed at 6:12 on a Thursday evening, and when I saw Danny's name on the screen, my chest did that thing. It's done since the day he was born, that small, involuntary clench that never goes away, no matter how old they get. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of chicken soup cooling in front of me, and the house so quiet I could hear the refrigerator cycling. Dorothy's photograph watched from the counter where I'd kept it since the funeral, her 2019 smile tired around the eyes, but stubborn in the jaw. The way she looked when she had something to say and was deciding whether you deserved to hear it. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Danny. Hey, Dad just wanted to let you know we moved down to Phoenix about 5 weeks ago. Renee got this opportunity and we had to move fast. Forgot to call." I set the spoon down. The bowl shifted on the placemat and nearly tipped. 5 weeks. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my 2 grandchildren had packed their lives into boxes driven across the country and settled into a new city without telling me. Danny Calloway, 35 years old, a man I had taught to ride a bike and change a tire and shake hands like he meant it, was delivering this news with a voice so flat and rehearsed, it sounded like he was reading from a script taped to his refrigerator. "That's 5 weeks, Danny. You moved my grandchildren across the country, and you're telling me now. It happened fast, Dad. Renee found this business deal, and the timeline was..." "Danny, wrap it up. We have dinner plans." That was Renee, born Renee Patricia. Marlowe, 33. Speaking from somewhere behind him, with the clipped impatience of someone who had already moved on from the conversation before it started. I'd met her at their wedding 4 years ago, and spent every holiday since trying to find the warmth my son apparently saw in her. Dorothy had stopped trying long before I did. You know how it is? Doesn't matter if your kid is 35 or 5, some part of you still hears the little boy who used to ask you to check under the bed. You hear something wrong in his voice, and your whole body goes still the way it used to go. Still when a board cracked wrong on a job site. You don't move, you listen. Danny put Renee on the phone. "Dad, it's fine. I'll call you this weekend, okay? We'll set up a time for you to talk to Ren and Tyler." "You'll set up a time," I repeated. "I gotta go, Dad. Love you." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone against my ear for another 10 seconds, listening to nothing because I wasn't ready to put it down and face the quiet that was waiting. The soup had gone cold. Dorothy's photograph hadn't moved, but I swear her expression had shifted from watching to waiting. I am 62 years old. I spent 8 years in the Army, 29 years as a licensed general contractor in the state of Tennessee, and 3 years sitting in this kitchen alone since Dorothy died. I have built houses, bridges, commercial foundations. I know how structures fail. They don't collapse all at once. They shift. They settle. Small cracks appear in places you'd never think to check, and by the time you notice, the load-bearing wall is already compromised. I poured the soup down the sink and made coffee. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting at the same table with a yellow legal pad scrolling through 6 months of text messages from Danny. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. The text had started in April. Small questions spaced weeks apart, each one so casual I'd answered without thinking. "Hey, Dad, what year did you get your GC license renewed? What was your exact discharge date again? Renee's doing some family tree thing. Mom's maiden name, was it with an E or an A? Can you send me your SSN real quick family insurance form?" I'd answered every single one. Sent the numbers, the dates, the names. The way you hand your son a wrench when he asks for it. No questions, because why would you question your own child? Dorothy's voice came back to me then, from a Sunday afternoon in 2019 I'd barely registered. She was standing at the stove stirring something, and she said it without turning around. "Frank, something about that woman isn't right." I'd told her she was being dramatic, She never brought it up again. She died 4 months later, and I buried that conversation with her because it was easier than admitting she might have been right about something I didn't want to see. By 3 in the morning, the coffee was cold, and the legal pad had 6 entries on it, each one circled with lines drawn between them. License number, discharge date, maiden name, social security number, date of birth, mother's maiden name, 6 data points across 6 months. Every piece a stranger would need to open accounts file applications and build a life in someone else's name. Not a stranger, my son. I sat with that thought until the kitchen window turned gray and the first bird started up outside. 5 o'clock. I hadn't slept. The pad was in front of me, and Dorothy was watching from the counter, and somewhere in Phoenix, my grandchildren were asleep, in a house I'd never seen in a city I hadn't been told about, living a life that might be built on my name without my permission. I took the Ford keys off the hook by the back door. I wasn't going to Phoenix yet. First, I needed to see what Danny had left behind. Danny's apartment building sat on the east side of Nashville, a brick mid-rise I'd co-signed the lease on 3 years ago, when he and Renee said they needed a fresh start. I parked the Ford at 7:15 and walked through the lobby doors into a smell I recognized from job sites, dust settling into silence like people who left without saying goodbye. Pete Kowalski was behind the front desk. 58 building superintendent for 12 years, a flannel shirt with coffee stains on the chest, and a ring of keys heavy enough to anchor a boat. He looked up from his mug, and his face did something I wasn't expecting. It went from recognition to confusion, like a man seeing a ghost who didn't know he was supposed to be dead. Frank thought you went with them, Pete said. Danny said you were heading down together once you wrapped things up here. He said that. I didn't make it a question. Pete set his coffee down. Everything okay? When did they move out, Pete? 5 weeks ago, give or take. He scratched the back of his neck. Movers came around midnight. 1 a.m., they were gone. Strangest move out I've seen in 12 years. I asked Danny about it the week before, and he said it was a work thing, had to be fast. Told me you knew all about it. Midnight Movers, a cover story with my name attached. My son hadn't just forgotten to call me. He'd actively lied to the people around him to make sure I wouldn't find out until he was 1,000 miles away. Let me tell you something about a man moving out at 1 in the morning. That's not a fresh start. That's a getaway. You don't hire movers for midnight unless you're running from something, or towards something you don't want anyone to see clearly. I'd spent enough years on construction sites to know the difference between a plan and a panic, and this had the fingerprints of both. I need to see the apartment, Pete, and my name's still on the lease. He didn't argue. He pulled the key off the ring and rode the elevator with me to the 8th floor without saying a word, which told me he'd already figured out that whatever Danny had told him was a lie. The apartment was gutted. Scuff marks ran along the hallway walls where furniture had been dragged in a hurry. Morning light came through the broken blinds in long yellow slats, catching dust motes that hung in the air like they had nowhere left to go. A bucket of cleaning supplies sat abandoned by the bathroom door. 3 half-packed boxes slumped in the living room, corner stuff not worth taking. I walked through every room the way I'd walk through a building after a storm, looking for what was damaged, what was missing, what had been left behind on purpose. The kitchen was stripped. The kids' room was empty except for a single crayon under the baseboard. Wren's probably. Purple. She always chose purple. The back bedroom had been set up as a corner office. A folding table, a power strip still plugged into the wall, and a manila folder wedged between the table and the baseboard where it had slid and been forgotten. I picked it up. The tab read, Callaway Construction Group, Phoenix, Arizona. I sat down on an overturned milk crate and opened it. Business cards, glossy laminated smooth under my thumb. Callaway Construction Group, Phoenix, Arizona. Licensed general contractor. Below that, my GC license number, TN4471GC, printed in clean black type. My license, my number. On a card for a company I'd never heard of, in a state I'd never worked in. Behind the card's contract proposals, 3 of them ranging from $75,000 to $120,000. Commercial projects, tenant improvements, retail build-outs. The kind of mid-range work that looks legitimate on paper, because it is legitimate work just not being done by the person whose name is on the bid. I taught that boy to read a blueprint at this same table height when he was 15. I'd set the drawings flat, hand him a scale ruler, and walk him through elevations until he could see the building before it existed. Now I was reading his blueprint for stealing my life. Behind the proposals, a photograph. My Army Medal of Valor displayed in a mahogany frame I'd never seen sitting on a desk in an office I'd never entered. Someone had staged it, placed it next to a hard hat and a set of rolled drawings to create the image of a seasoned contractor's workspace. The medal was real. Everything around it was fiction. The folder's label said, "Established 2014. Danny was 26 in 2014. I never authorized a thing." I turned to the last page. A printed email dated 8 months ago. The sender line read, danny.calloway@callawayconstgroup.com. The recipient was carol.calloway@gmail.com. Carol, my daughter, my firstborn. 37 years old, a paralegal in Nashville. The one who brought flowers to Dorothy's grave every other Sunday and called me on holidays and sat with me through the worst nights after the funeral. The message was 2 lines long. Carol need Dad's GC license renewal date and signature sample. You know what to do. You know what to do. Not, can you help me with something? Not, I have a question. You know what to do. The language of someone giving an instruction they've given before, to someone who's followed it before. I closed the folder. My hands were steady. The bile in my throat was not. I stood up from the milk crate, walked past Pete without a word, rode the elevator down, and crossed the lobby into the morning air. The folder rode home on my passenger seat like something radioactive. I could feel it there without looking. 2 of my children, both of them, and somewhere in Phoenix. My grandchildren were waking up in a house built on my stolen name. I didn't go inside the house. I pulled into the driveway, walked straight into the garage, and spread every page from that manila folder across the oak workbench I'd built with my own hands in 1998, the same surface where Danny first learned to read a set of drawings. The garage light was warm and yellow, the way it always is in the afternoon when the sun comes through the side window. Sawdust was embedded so deep in the grain of that bench that no amount of sanding would ever pull it out. I'd built things on this surface for 24 years. Now I stood over it reading the plans someone had drawn up to dismantle me. I went through every document the way I'd go through a punch list on a job site, methodical, no emotion, just facts. Invoice templates on Callaway Construction Group letterhead. Equipment rental agreements signed with my license number. Commercial contract bids, 3 of them, ranging from $75,000 to $120,000. All of them listing me as the supervising licensed contractor. Then I found the one that stopped me. A fully paid invoice, $98,000 remitted in full by a woman named Eleanor Gibbs in Phoenix, Arizona, for a complete home renovation, kitchen bathroom, structural modifications. My name at the top as the supervising licensed engineer, my GC number at the bottom, a signature that looked close enough to mine to fool anyone who wasn't me. $98,000, paid in full, for work I never supervised on a property I've never seen for a client I've never spoken to. And because my license number was on that invoice, I was legally responsible for every beam, every wire, every load-bearing wall in that woman's house. If a ceiling collapsed, if a pipe burst, if the foundation shifted, that was my name on the liability line. You ever hold a piece of paper that could ruin your life and realize your own son put it there? You don't crumple it. You don't throw it across the room. You set it down carefully. The way you'd set down something explosive, and you stand very still while your brain catches up to what your hands already know. I made coffee. I drank half of it before it went cold and forgot about the rest. By the time headlights swept across the garage door at 8 o'clock, I'd read every page twice and arranged them in rows across the bench like evidence, which is exactly what they were. Jerry Hoffman stepped out of his Lincoln and walked into the garage carrying the same cracked leather briefcase he'd carried for as long as I'd known him. 65 years old estate attorney. Dorothy's lawyer before he became mine. He wore reading glasses from the previous decade, an expression that said he already knew this visit wasn't about updating a will. "You said it was urgent," Jerry said. He set the briefcase on the corner of the bench and looked at the papers spread across the surface. "What am I looking at?" "My son's been running a construction company in Phoenix using my GC license, my credentials, my medal, my signature. I found this folder in his apartment this morning." Jerry didn't respond right away. He snapped the briefcase clasp open out of habit, then closed it again without reaching inside. He put on his reading glasses and moved along the bench, picking up each document, scanning it, setting it back down. 3 minutes of silence. Outside crickets started up in the yard. The garage smelled like sawdust and old leather and the cold coffee I'd abandoned on the shelf. When he finished, he straightened up and looked at me over the top of his glasses. Frank, your son has been operating a construction business using your credentials on projects worth over $300,000. If anything goes wrong on any of these sites, structural failure, code violation, injury, you're legally liable. Not Danny, you, your license, your insurance, your assets. I know. Do you know about Carol Bessistock? One of the stars. The question hit different coming from Jerry. Coming from the folder, it was shock. Coming from a man who had known both my children since they were in grade school, it was confirmation. I saw the email, I said. Danny asked her for my license renewal date and a signature sample. Jerry took off his reading glasses and set them on the workbench slowly, deliberately, the way he does when he's about to say something that changes the shape of a room. I've seen him do it twice before. Once when he told me Dorothy's prognosis. Once when he read me her will. Frank, I have something else. Something I've been holding for 4 years. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored standard legal size. With handwriting on the front I would have recognized from across a parking lot. Dorothy's handwriting, careful, slightly slanted the way she wrote when something mattered. It's for Frank. Open when you truly need it. She gave this to me 6 months before she died, Jerry said. Told me to keep it in my office safe. Said I'd know when the time was right. Her exact words were, Jerry. Only give it to Frank when he really needs it. I stared at the envelope from 3 feet away. I could feel the weight of it, not paperweight, something heavier. The weight of a woman who had seen something, understood something, and chosen to leave a map instead of a warning because she knew the warning wouldn't have been enough. Dorothy had been carrying something alone. The same woman who told me in 2019 that something about Renee wasn't right. The warning I'd dismissed had gone to a lawyer sealed in an envelope and left instructions for after she was gone. Not yet, I said. I need to know more first. Jerry held the envelope for another moment, then placed it on the workbench between the invoice for $98,000 and a contract I'd never signed. Dorothy's handwriting sat there under the garage, light, patient, and steady the way she'd always been. She'd waited 4 years for me to catch up. She could wait a little longer. I left Dorothy's envelope on the workbench overnight. It was still there Saturday morning, when the phone rang at 7, her handwriting catching the early light through the garage window, like a quiet accusation. Ray Maddox called at 7 on a Saturday morning, which meant one of two things: either somebody died, or he'd found something that made him wish somebody had. Ray was 61, a man I'd served beside in the same Army unit 30 years ago, and he'd spent the last 2 decades working at the Tennessee Contractor Licensing Board. He didn't call on weekends unless the building was on fire. Frank, you need to sit down. I'm already sitting, Ray. I ran Arizona ROC records overnight. Your name popped on 2 registered entities. First one is the construction outfit, Callaway Construction Group, registered 8 months ago. You listed as managing principal, but there's a second one. I picked up the pen I'd left on the desk. Callaway Legacy Properties, Ray said. Commercial Real Estate, LLC. 3 signed purchase agreements. Total value $840,000. And you're listed as managing partner on every single one. $840,000. I need to say that number again so it sits with you the way it sat with me. $840,000 in commercial real estate deals I never signed, for properties I've never seen in a state where I don't hold a real estate license. The construction fraud was bad enough. This was a second company, a second layer, built on the same stolen foundation. One of the buyers is something called Pruitt Property Holdings, LLC, Ray continued. $280,000. Ring any bells, Barcias? No, but I'm writing it down. I pressed the pen into the notepad hard enough to dent the pages beneath. Pruitt Property Holdings. The name meant nothing to me then. It would mean everything later. Ray promised to pull the full incorporation records Monday morning and told me to call a criminal attorney. I thanked him and hung up. Then sat in my home office staring at the notepad until the coffee I'd poured went cold without being touched. By noon, I'd opened my laptop and typed the words I'd been avoiding all morning. Callaway Construction Group, Phoenix, Arizona. The website loaded in 2 seconds. Professional layout, clean design, the kind of site that costs money to build and maintain. An About Us page with a photograph of my framed Army Medal of Valor, the same stage photo from the apartment folder, mahogany frame hard hat. Beside it, rolled drawings in the background. Below it, my Silver Star certificate scanned in high resolution, every line of text legible. and beneath both a section labeled Military Heritage. I read it once, then read it again, because the first time I thought I might be hallucinating. While built on military discipline and precision, only a decorated Army veteran can provide. Frank Callaway brings over 30 years of engineering expertise and a commitment to excellence forged in service to his country. My Silver Star, the one that sat in my bedroom beside Dorothy's reading lamp for 20 years, was being used to sell kitchen renovations to retirees in Arizona. The medal I earned carrying a wounded sergeant across 400 meters of open ground was now a marketing tool for people I'd never met, doing work I'd never approved, under a name they had stolen from a man they assumed would never look. The client list was on the contact page. 6 names, 6 phone numbers, 6 projects labeled completed or in progress. I recognized one Eleanor Gibbs, the $98,000 invoice from the folder. I dialed her number. Eleanor Gibbs answered on the 3rd ring. 71 years old, a Phoenix retiree whose voice carried the careful politeness of a woman who'd been raised to trust people until they gave her a reason not to. "Oh, Mr. Callaway," she said, and the warmth in her voice nearly broke me. "But I already spoke with you personally, 3 months ago. You reviewed my project and told me the structural plans were solid. You said you'd oversee everything yourself." I gripped the edge of the desk. "Ma'am, I have never called you. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I haven't been involved in any construction project in over 2 years. Silence. The kind of silence that fills up a room even through a phone line. "Are you telling me the work isn't being supervised by a licensed engineer?" Her voice had changed. The politeness was still there, but something underneath it had cracked. "I'm telling you that whoever you spoke with was not me. Someone used my name, my credentials, and apparently my voice to convince you I was involved. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gibbs. I am truly sorry." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that landed in my chest like a fist. "He sounded exactly like you. Exactly. He knew details about your military service, your license history, your years in the business. I asked him about his family, and he told me about his late wife. He used her name." "What name did he use?" "Dorothy?" I closed my eyes. Whoever had done this hadn't just forged my signature and stolen my credentials. They had studied me, my voice, my history, my dead wife's name, and built a performance convincing enough to fool a 71-year-old woman into handing over her savings. This wasn't paperwork fraud. This was something else entirely. Someone had learned to become me. Eleanor Gibbs was crying softly on the other end of the line. $98,000 lighter because she trusted a voice on the phone that sounded like mine, that used my wife's name like a prop that turned my service record into a sales pitch. I stayed on the line and let her cry, because there was nothing I could say that would give her back what she'd lost. When she finally hung up, I sat in the office with the laptop still glowing and the website still open and Dorothy's name still ringing in my ears. Someone hadn't just stolen my identity. They had worn it. After Eleanor Gibbs hung up, I sat at my desk for 10 minutes, listening to the house settle around me. Then I picked up my keys, walked past Dorothy's envelope still sitting on the garage workbench, and drove to the Kroger parking lot on Nolensville Road. I made 6 phone calls that Saturday afternoon, from the cab of my truck rain, flecking the windshield, each call worse than the last. The website had listed 6 client numbers. I'd already spoken with Eleanor. The remaining 5 answered, and every single one told me the same story. They had spoken directly with a man who identified himself as Frank Callaway, deep voice, calm, unhurried. He talked about military precision, about building things right the first time, about his years of service. He knew details, my license history, my discharge year, the kind of small facts that make a person real on the other end of a phone line. Client number 3 was a woman in Scottsdale who had paid $32,000 for a bathroom remodel. She started crying before I finished explaining. "Mr. Callaway, you told me yourself you said you'd personally inspected every beam. Are you saying that wasn't you?" "That was not me, ma'am. I have never spoken with you before today." Client number 4 was a retired school teacher in Mesa, $41,000 for a garage conversion. Client number 5 was a couple in Chandler, $62,000 for a kitchen and foundation repair. Every one of them elderly, every one of them living alone or nearly alone. Every one of them targeted because they were the kind of people who still believe a veteran's word means something. 6 people, most of them over 60, most of them living alone, handed over their savings because they heard my voice and believed a decorated veteran wouldn't lie to them. The total across all 6 exceeded $200,000. $200,000 from people who trusted a voice on the phone because it sounded steady and honest and military, because it sounded like me. I called Jerry from the parking lot. Jerry, 6 people, over $200,000. Someone is pretending to be me on the phone, not just using my name, performing me. Get me the FBI, today. Jerry said he'd make the call Monday morning. I hung up and sat in the truck for another 20 minutes, watching the rain slide down the glass. Not eating, not drinking, not moving. I hadn't eaten since Friday night. My mouth was dry, and my hands were steady, and somewhere in Phoenix there were 6 houses full of work that nobody qualified had ever inspected. Monday morning, I walked into First Tennessee Bank at 9:15. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and recirculated air, and soft music played from speakers in the ceiling, the kind of music designed to make you feel calm while someone explains how your life has been dismantled. Marcus Webb, 34. The account manager who had handled my finances since I moved everything under one roof after Dorothy died, looked at his computer screen and frowned. Then he looked at me and frowned harder. Mr. Calloway, according to this credit report, you guaranteed a $28,000 equipment loan for Calloway Construction Group in Phoenix, Arizona. Approved 7 weeks ago. I never signed anything. Marcus turned the monitor toward me. There it was, a loan application with my name, my social security number, my license credentials, and a signature at the bottom that looked so much like mine I had to study it for 10 seconds before I could see the difference. The tail on the Y was wrong. Slightly too long, slightly too curved. A detail no one would catch unless they had been signing that name for 62 years. I need to speak with your fraud department, I said. A stranger stealing your identity is a crime. Someone who sits at your dinner table doing it is something the law doesn't have a word for. I sat in that cold vinyl bank chair, waiting for the fraud investigator, and thought about every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. Every Sunday dinner where Danny and Renee had sat across from me and smiled and passed the potatoes and asked questions I now understood were reconnaissance. Mr. Hartley appeared. 15 minutes later, the bank's fraud investigator, a serious man in his late 40s, who examined forged signatures the way a surgeon examines x-rays. He spread the loan documents across the glass desk, put on a pair of thin gloves, and studied the signature under a magnifying lens. If the Y is off, he said, and the pressure is wrong too, even. Real signatures have micro variations in pressure because your hand moves from memory. This was drawn, not signed, slowly and carefully by someone who practiced. Can you flag it? Already flagging it. But Mr. Calloway, I need you to understand something. He set the magnifier down and looked at me directly. Whoever forged this knew your personal information intimately. Social security license number, military service, dates banking history. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone inside your life. I already knew that. I'd known it since I found that email in Danny's apartment. But hearing it from a man who examined fraud for a living, hearing it stated as professional fact rather than personal suspicion, made it land differently. Heavier, final. I drove home gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way the Army taught me steady hands even when everything else is falling apart. Hartley was right. Danny couldn't have done all of this alone. The voice impersonation, the website, the contracts, the loan, this was coordinated, rehearsed. Someone else had fed him every detail he needed. My license renewal date, my discharge papers, samples of my handwriting. Someone who'd had years of access, who knew where every document was filed, who understood my routines well enough to predict when I wouldn't be looking. I knew who it was. I just wasn't ready to say her name. Not yet. Not until I had one more piece, something that would make it impossible for her to deny. Because when you accuse your own daughter, you only get one chance to be right. I didn't confront Carol, not yet. I needed one more piece before I could say her name out loud and mean it the way it would need to be meant. Instead, I did what any reasonable man does when his family is stealing his life. I walked into a police station and asked for help. There's a particular kind of relief that comes from handing your problem to someone with a badge. You sit down, you lay it out. You watch them write it all down in a leather notebook. And for a few minutes, you believe the system was built for exactly this moment. I'd learned soon enough that relief was the most dangerous thing I felt all week. Detective Neil Pruitt, 44, met me in his office on the 2nd floor of the Nashville station Monday afternoon. Firm handshake, direct gaze across a dark wooden desk. Tennessee flag on the wall behind him, framed commendation beside it, cold coffee in a ceramic mug that said, "World's okayest detective." The kind of man who makes you feel for one brief moment that everything is going to be handled. He offered me a styrofoam cup of coffee. I drank it out of politeness. It tasted sour and lukewarm, like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. I laid out everything. The folder from Danny's apartment, the fake construction company, the forged loan, the voice impersonation. Pruitt listened without interrupting, his pen scratching steadily across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, and it creaked under his weight. Frank, your son really did his homework, he said. This level of preparation takes months. Who else knows you've come to us? My lawyer, an old Army buddy at the licensing board. Pruitt nodded slowly. Best to keep this tight. Operational security. Don't tell anyone else your next step, not even family. It sounded right. It sounded professional. He asked about the bank loan, the exact amount, the exact date, which branch I'd visited, the name of the fraud investigator I'd spoken with. He asked which records Ray had pulled, and from which database. He asked whether I'd contacted the Arizona ROC directly, or gone through a third party. Every question was specific probing, the kind of detail work you'd expect from a detective who takes his job seriously. Except for one thing, he asked all of it before he'd read the file. I didn't catch that until later. In the moment, I was too relieved to notice that a man asking the right questions at the wrong time isn't being thorough, he's being strategic. I remember thinking as I walked out of that station into the afternoon sun that for the first time in a week, something was finally being handled by the right people. I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. I glanced back through the office window as I crossed the parking lot. Pruitt was already on the phone. Not the desk line, the personal cell he'd kept in his jacket pocket the entire time I was sitting across from him. He was turned toward the window, talking fast, one hand flat on the desk. I told myself it was nothing. A man makes a call after an interview. That's procedure. But something about the posture stayed with me, the speed of it, the urgency. The way he'd turned away from the door like he didn't want to be read. Tuesday morning, Ray called. I traced that LLC you asked about, he said. Pruitt Property Holdings, director listed as James Robert Pruitt, registered in Arizona 14 months ago. It's the buyer in that $280,000 transaction under Callaway Legacy Properties. I set the phone down on the workbench. The garage smelled like sawdust and old wood, and the truth I'd been circling for 5 days. Ray, say the director's name again. It's James Robert Pruitt. I filed my police report with him yesterday. The line went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when two people arrive at the same terrible conclusion at the same time, and neither one wants to be the first to say it. I called Jerry. He pulled the LLC filing independently and confirmed it within the hour. Pruitt Property Holdings, registered in Maricopa County, Director James R. Pruitt. Buyer in a sham real estate deal built on my stolen credentials. Frank, this means Pruitt isn't just investigating your case. Jerry said, his voice careful and flat. He has a financial interest in one of those transactions. Everything you told him yesterday, every document, every name, every next step he now has. The man I'd handed my entire case file to, every bank record, every client name, every piece of evidence I'd spent a week assembling, was on the other side of the table, not beside me, across from me. He hadn't been taking notes to build a case. He'd been taking notes to protect one. I sat in the garage for a long time after Jerry hung up. The Christmas photo was still on the wall. Last December, the whole family gathered at my kitchen table. Carol standing next to Danny, her arm around Renee's shoulder, Ren on my lap, Tyler reaching for a cookie. Dorothy's empty chair pushed in, but still at the table because none of us could bring ourselves to move it. I'd looked at this picture 100 times since she died. Tonight I saw something different. Not the faces I knew every face. What I saw were the connections between them. The lines I'd never drawn. Carol to Danny, Danny to Renee, Renee to a detective whose name I'd written on a legal pad a week ago, without knowing why it mattered. And the one face missing from the photograph, the man now sitting in a Nashville police office with my entire case on his desk, making phone calls the moment I walked out the door. I reached for Dorothy's envelope on the workbench. Then I stopped. Not yet, but soon. I didn't sleep Tuesday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Pruitt's hand reaching for his personal phone the moment I cleared his office door. By Wednesday morning, I'd made a decision the envelope couldn't wait any longer. Whatever Dorothy had left for me, the time she'd described, had arrived. Jerry's office safe was the old kind combination, dial-heavy steel door, the sound it made when it opened like a vault exhaling something it had held too long. He'd called me at 7 and told me to come in before his first appointment. When I arrived at 8, he was already standing beside the safe with his reading glasses on and his hands empty waiting. She brought this to me in April 2019, Jerry said. 5 months before she died, she said Jerry only give it to Frank when he really needs it. I've honored that for 4 years. He handed me the envelope. Dorothy's handwriting on the front, careful slightly slanted the way she wrote when something mattered. The seal was intact. No one had opened it. Whatever was inside had been sitting in the dark for 4 years, waiting for me to catch up to what she already knew. I sat down in the leather chair across from Jerry's desk. The office smelled the way it always did, old leather wood polish, the faint staleness of legal files that have been closed longer than they were open. The clock on the wall ticked. Morning light came through the blinds and cut across the desk in thin white lines. I tore the seal. Inside were 2 things: a 2-page letter in Dorothy's handwriting and a small red USB drive no bigger than my thumb. I unfolded the letter. The paper was soft from 4 years in the safe, but her handwriting was steady. Not shaking, not rushed. The script of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and how little time she had to do it. I read it once in silence. Then I read the first paragraph aloud because Jerry needed to hear it and because saying it out loud was the only way I could make it real. Well, Frank, I saw what Renee did in your study. Tuesday, March 12th. I came downstairs at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. The study door was open. Renee was standing at your filing cabinet with her phone photographing your contractor's license, your social security card. She had your signature samples spread on the desk, the ones from the old tax folders. She didn't see me. I watched for 40 seconds before I backed away. I stopped reading. My breathing was the loudest sound in the room. I'd been married to Dorothy for 35 years, and in all that time she never once asked me to carry something for her. She carried it herself, quietly, completely, until her body couldn't carry anything at all. And in March of 2019, while I was sleeping upstairs, she stood in a dark hallway and watched our daughter-in-law photograph the keys to my identity. And she carried that too. I kept reading. I confronted Danny the next day. Not Renee Danny. He was my son, and I wanted to hear it from him. He broke down. He said Renee had talked him into it, said it was just for one project. Said they needed the license temporarily. He begged me for 6 months to straighten it out. I gave him 6 months. I shouldn't have. But he was my boy, Frank. He was my boy. The letter continued. Dorothy had spent the following weeks gathering evidence quietly. The USB drive contained photos and recordings she'd made, but her health deteriorated that spring. The diagnosis came in May. By July, she could barely walk to the mailbox. She never told me because she thought Danny would fix it. She thought 6 months would be enough. Frank, I tried to protect you. I tried to handle it the way you would have, quietly, directly giving people a chance to do the right thing. Danny promised me. He looked me in the eye and promised. I'm sorry I believed him. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to tell you before my body gave out. The USB has everything I could gather. Use it when you need it. I love you. I always loved you. Dorothy. How do you hold a letter from your dead wife and not wonder if I'd paid closer attention if I'd listened that Sunday afternoon in 2019 when she tried to tell me something about Renee? Would she still be here? Would she have told me everything if I'd just stopped and listened instead of telling her she was being dramatic? I folded the letter and set it on Jerry's desk. My hands were steady. My jaw was not. I tasted salt at the corners of my mouth and realized my eyes were wet. I hadn't cried since the funeral. I wasn't sure this counted as crying. It felt more like something leaking out of a crack I didn't know was there. The USB drive sat on the mahogany desk between us. Small, red, lighter than a house key. Whatever Dorothy had recorded on it, photos of the filing cabinet, maybe audio. Maybe something worse, she'd done it alone, in a house with people who didn't want her to talk, while she was dying. Jerry looked at me. I looked at the drive. When you're ready, he said. I picked up the drive and held it in my palm. It was warm from the safe, or maybe I imagined that. Maybe I wanted it to be warm because everything Dorothy touched used to carry her warmth, and I wasn't ready to admit that 4 years in a steel box might have taken even that away. Not now, I said. I need to listen to this when I'm ready. Not now. I put the drive in my shirt pocket close to the chest. I folded the letter back into the envelope and held it in my lap. Jerry didn't push. He'd known Dorothy long enough to understand that whatever she'd left behind was heavier than paper and plastic, and the man holding it needed time to find the floor before he could stand up again. I walked out of Jerry's office with Dorothy's letter in my jacket and her USB drive in my shirt pocket close to the chest. I wasn't ready to listen to whatever she'd recorded, not yet. I needed to sit with the weight of what she'd written before I added the sound of her voice to it. I was still in the truck engine, off hands on the wheel, when a number I didn't recognize lit up the screen. 602 area code, Phoenix, Arizona. I answered, Mr. Calloway. The voice was young, nervous, the kind of breathing you hear from someone who's been working up the courage to make a call for days. My name is Tommy Briggs. I was an apprentice at your son's company in Phoenix. I'm calling from a prepaid phone because I don't trust the regular one anymore. Tommy Briggs, 32 years old, he told me later. A licensed apprentice who'd taken the job because the website looked legitimate and the company had a decorated veteran's name on it. He'd worked there for 5 months and was owed 3 months of wages, $8,400 that Danny kept promising was coming. Mr. Calloway, I need you to know, Danny told us you were in on everything, said you approved, the contracts approved, the license transfers approved, the client calls. He said you were the silent managing partner. I approved nothing, son. Silence on the line, then a long exhale like a man releasing something he'd been carrying in his lungs for weeks. I figured, Tommy said. Because the thing is, Mr. Calloway, I saw him sign your name. Not once, multiple times, in front of clients. He'd pull out the contracts and sign Frank Calloway at the bottom, like he'd been doing it his whole life. I recorded one of those on my phone. Video, clear as day. I gripped the steering wheel. The leather was cold. October air was settling into the truck, and the parking lot was empty except for Jerry's Lincoln and a dumpster at the far end. I could hear Nashville traffic in the distance, the low hum of a city that didn't know what was happening in a parked Ford on a side street. There's something else, Tommy said. His voice dropped. He practiced it, sir. In the office bathroom. I heard him through the wall. Deep voice, slow, like he was reading from a script. This is Frank Calloway. I've reviewed the structural plans personally. Over and over. He did it until he got it right. My own son stood in a bathroom mirror and practiced speaking in my voice until he could fool elderly clients out of their savings. He studied the way I talk, the cadence, the pauses. The way I flatten my vowels because 8 years in the Army knocked the Tennessee out of most of them. He rehearsed being me, the way an actor rehearses a role. Except the stage was a phone line and the audience was people who trusted a veteran's word because they had no reason not to. I sat in that truck and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, I'd been angry for a week. This was different. This was the moment the last thread of doubt snapped. The part of me that had been holding on to the possibility that Danny was in over his head, that Renee had manipulated him into something he didn't fully understand, that part went quiet. You don't rehearse an impersonation of your father in a bathroom because someone pressured you. You do it because you chose to. Let me ask you something. If your son rehearsed being you, not to honor you, not to carry on something you built, but to rob people in your name, what would that feel like? I'll tell you. It feels like being erased while you're still alive. It feels like standing in your own skin and realizing someone made a copy of you and the copy is the one people trust. Tommy, how did you get my number? Your daughter, Carol. She gave it to Danny months ago. It was in the office contacts. I copied it before they wiped my access. Why are you calling me? Because I'm owed $8,400 and nobody's answering the office phone. And because those clients are good people, Mr. Calloway. Mrs. Gibbs brought us cookies on Fridays. She deserves to know the truth. Eleanor Gibbs brought them cookies. I closed my eyes. Tommy, I need you to hold on to that video. Don't delete it. Don't send it to anyone. I'm going to give you a name and a number, my attorney Jerry Hoffman, and you're going to send it to him. Can you do that? Yes, sir. But Mr. Calloway, be careful with the police there. The truck went very still. Danny knows you already filed a report, Tommy said. I heard him on the phone with someone, Nashville accent. Whoever it was, Danny called him by a title, not a name, like they were familiar, like it wasn't the first conversation. A title, not detective, not officer. Just a title, the way you address someone you've talked to enough times that formality has worn down to shorthand. Danny was getting information from inside the Nashville Police Department, and the man feeding it to him was the same man sitting behind a wooden desk with a ceramic mug and a Tennessee flag, asking me questions he already knew the answers to. Tommy gave me his email address and hung up. I sat in the truck watching the October sky darken over Nashville, the streetlights clicking on, one by one, along the road outside Jerry's office. The USB drive was still in my shirt pocket. Dorothy's letter was still in my jacket. Tommy's video was still on a prepaid phone in Phoenix, and somewhere across town. The detective assigned to my case was reporting every move I made to the people who'd stolen my name. From now on, Pruitt wouldn't know a single thing I did next. Thursday morning, I drove past the Nashville police station without slowing down. Pruitt could sit behind his desk and wait for a call that would never come. From now on, everything went through the FBI. Agent Sandra Cho closed the conference room door before I could even sit down. Not the polite close of someone starting a meeting, but the firm click of someone sealing a room. She was 42, FBI Nashville Financial Crimes, short dark hair, navy blue vest, and the unhurried precision of someone who had built cases longer and worse than this one. She didn't offer coffee. She didn't offer small talk. She pulled out a chair across the white table, opened her laptop, and said, "Show me everything." I showed her everything. The folder from Danny's apartment, the LLC registrations. Ray had pulled the forged bank loan, the 6 client calls, Tommy's warning about the Nashville leak. Jerry sat beside me and filled in the legal framework. Sandra listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between the documents and her screen. A camera blinked in the corner of the ceiling. The room smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air, and the particular sterility of a place where bad news is delivered as a matter of routine. When I finished, Sandra turned her laptop toward me. Detective Pruitt was flagged internally in 2019 for leaking investigative information, she said. Insufficient evidence. File closed, but it stayed on our radar. She scrolled to a second screen. A photograph, younger, different hair, but the same face I'd seen on my daughter-in-law at every family dinner for 4 years. Renee Calloway, birth name Renee Patricia Marlowe, lived in Denver from 2015 to 2017. During that time, she and Pruitt dated for 18 months, 2015 to 2016. The room went very quiet. Jerry shifted in his chair. I stared at the photograph and let the timeline build itself in my head. Renee dated Pruitt in Denver. Then she moved to Nashville and married Danny. Then Pruitt transferred to Nashville PD. Then the fraud started. "Jess, she put him in Nashville before she put Danny in Phoenix," I said. Sandra nodded once. "That's our working theory. Pruitt wasn't an accident. He was infrastructure. Renee hadn't stumbled into our family. She'd scouted it the way a contractor surveys a building before demolition. She'd studied the load-bearing walls where the money was, where the trust was, where the blind spots were, and she placed her people before she swung the first hammer. Danny was the access point. Carol was the data source. Pruitt was the safety net. And I was the building." Sandra opened a thicker folder, physical this time, not digital. Manila worn at the edges, a case number stamped on the tab, CO-2014-FR-0088, Colorado. 2014, Sandra said. Renee Marlowe marries Gerald Whitmore, 58, owner of a small construction company in Denver. Same scheme. She gathered his credentials, opened an LLC. It signed commercial contracts under his name. Whitmore lost $340,000. She vanished before prosecution. Whitmore never rebuilt. Gerald Whitmore, 62, now still alive in Boulder. A man I'd never met whose story read like a rough draft of my own. Same profession, same age range, same trusting nature, same woman. The only difference between us was that Whitmore didn't have children she could recruit. "Danny wasn't the architect of this fraud," Sandra said. "He was the vehicle. That doesn't make him innocent." "No, it doesn't, but it changes the picture." She was right, and I hated that she was right, because it meant the anger I'd been building toward Danny, the clean, justified father-to-son fury, was more complicated than I wanted it to be. Danny had made choices, real ones, criminal ones. But the woman who taught him how to make those choices had been running this playbook for nearly a decade. And my son was the latest name on a list that started with a man in Boulder who lost everything and never got it back. Gerald Whitmore lost everything 8 years ago to the same woman who was now using my son's hands to dismantle my life. And he was still standing in Boulder, still breathing, still warning strangers because no one had warned him. "Whitmore is still alive," Sandra said. "Lives in Boulder. When I called him this morning, he said one thing." She looked at me across the white table, and for the first time her professional calm softened into something closer to sympathy. He said, "Tell the father she always targets men who love their families too much to see what's right in front of them." I looked down at my hands. They were flat on the table, steady the way I'd trained them to be in the Army and on job sites and in hospital rooms. Steady hands. That was always my thing. Dorothy used to say I could hold a level in an earthquake. But Whitmore wasn't wrong. I'd loved my family so much I'd handed them every key they needed to rob me blind. Every text Danny sent, license number, discharge date, Social Security, I'd answered without a second thought. Because why would you question your own son? Why would you lock a filing cabinet in your own house? Why would you listen when your dying wife said something about Renee wasn't right? Because love makes you stupid. Not the dramatic kind of stupid, the quiet kind. The kind where you leave doors unlocked because locking them would mean admitting the people inside might not be safe. I'd spent 62 years building things and never once thought to check the foundation under my own family. Sandra asked if I wanted water. I shook my head. What happens next? I asked. We build the case, quietly. Pruitt doesn't know we're involved, and we keep it that way. I need your help, Frank, but I also need your patience. I stood up and pushed the chair back under the table. Jerry gathered the documents. Sandra walked us to the elevator and shook my hand with a grip that said more than her words had. On the drive home, Whitmore's message played on a loop in my head. Men who love their families too much to see what's right in front of them. I was done not seeing. Whitmore's words followed me home like a dog I couldn't shake. Men who love their families too much to see what's right in front of them. I parked in the driveway and sat in the garage with the door down and the light off, letting the truth settle. There's a question every father hopes he'll never have to answer. And that Thursday afternoon, I answered it. The Christmas photo was still on the wall. Dorothy's USB drive was still on the workbench. The FBI files were in a folder on the passenger seat. Everything I'd learned in 9 days was arranged in my head, the way I used to arrange materials on a job site, organized, measured, ready. The only thing left was the decision. I asked myself the question that had been building all week. If a stranger had done this, stolen my credentials, forged my signature, impersonated my voice, used my military service to rob elderly retirees, what would I do? The answer came without hesitation, without a single second of doubt. Full prosecution. Every charge, every count, no mercy. So, why should it be different because the stranger was my son? People ask me if it was hard to make that call to choose the law over my own blood. It wasn't hard. It was the easiest decision I ever made. The question answered itself the moment I framed it honestly. Living with it afterward, that was the hard part. But making it, that took less time than pouring a cup of coffee. I picked up the phone and called Jerry. Jerry, we're going all the way, family or not. This is criminal. A pause. Then, I'll start the paperwork tonight. I hung up and sat in the garage for another 10 minutes. The wall clock ticked. The sawdust smell was the same as it had been for 24 years. Same bench, same tools, same man. The only thing that had changed was that the man now understood what his family was capable of. Then I picked up the phone again and called Carol. She arrived 40 minutes later. Carol Calloway, 38, a civil engineer who normally carried herself with the straight-backed precision of someone who solved problems for a living. Not tonight. She stood at the kitchen door with red-rimmed eyes and unwashed hair pulled back, looking like someone arriving at her own sentencing. I didn't greet her. I placed the printed email on the bare kitchen table, the one from Danny's apartment, the one addressed to her, and sat down across from it. The email faced her. I said nothing. Carol looked at it. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. She knew what it said. How long, Carol? She sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. Almost 2 years. What did you give them? Everything. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The license renewal date, the signature samples, your social security number, your discharge date. Renee said you'd be proud when you found out. She said it was going to be a family business, that Danny was finally building something real. And you believe that? I wanted to believe it, Dad. There's a difference. There is a difference, and it doesn't matter as much as she wanted it to. Wanting to believe a lie doesn't make the lie smaller. It makes the person telling it more effective. I asked the question I'd been saving, the one that had been sitting in the back of my throat since I read Dorothy's letter that morning. The signature samples, where did Renee get them from? Carol was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. The coffee maker sat cold and untouched on the counter. Neither of us had poured a cup. Neither of us would. From Mom's old birthday cards, Carol said, the ones you wrote her every year. I still had them in a box after she died, all of them 35 years worth. Renee asked to see them one afternoon, said she missed Mom, said she wanted to feel close to her. Though, every year on Dorothy's birthday, I'd written her a card by hand, not store-bought sentiment, my own words, my own ink signed the same way every time. All my love, Frank. 35 years of that closing. 35 samples of my signature. Each one slightly different because real signatures carry the weight of the year. They were written in the good years pressed lighter, the hard years pressed deeper. And now, those words, written for the woman I loved more than anything on this earth, were being used to sign contracts I'd never seen for buildings I'd never entered. I closed my eyes. I felt the lids press shut, and I held them there, because opening them meant looking at my daughter and seeing what she'd done. Bile rose in my throat. Not anger this time, something worse. The taste of something sacred turned rancid love letters, repurposed as forgery templates, handed over by my own daughter to the woman who may have helped kill the person they were written for. Wait, Carl, one more thing. The signature, where exactly did Renee practice copying it? An upper keys. Carol turned toward the window. Her reflection stared back at both of us. A woman who knew the answer was going to change the shape of this room the way every other answer had changed every other room this week. At our kitchen table, she said, while Wren was doing homework. I waited. Wren watched her trace your handwriting over and over. She asked Renee what she was doing. Renee told her it was a surprise for Grandpa. My 7-year-old granddaughter had watched her mother forge my name on birthday cards written by a dead woman and thought it was a craft project. She'd sat there with her crayons and her spelling words while Renee traced the curves of all my love, Frank, onto blank paper, practicing until the forgery was good enough to fool a bank. I opened my eyes. Carol was still facing the window. I was still sitting at the table. The email was still between us. And somewhere in this house, in a box I hadn't opened since the funeral, were 35 years of birthday cards that would never mean the same thing again. Carol didn't leave after telling me about the birthday cards. She stayed in that kitchen chair like someone who'd only told half a confession and knew the second half was worse. I sat across from her and waited. In 35 years of marriage, Dorothy taught me one useful thing about difficult conversations. The person talking will always tell you more if you give them silence instead of questions. Carol stared at the table. Then she started talking again, and this time her voice was different, not guilty, not defensive, wounded. Mom told me 3 times in the hospital, she said. 3 times. She said, Carol, you are the engineer. Those tools belong with you. The workbench, the precision instruments, the Ford. She said it the week before she died. I didn't move. I tried to tell you, Dad, twice. After the funeral, when you were signing the paperwork to transfer everything to Danny. I said Mom wanted me to have the tools. You told me I was being petty. You said Danny needed them more because he was starting a family. I remembered. Not the words exactly, but the moment Carol standing in this kitchen, me signing papers Jerry had prepared, and the rawness of a grief so thick I couldn't hear anything through it. I'd signed the transfer without reading it, because reading meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and I wasn't ready to feel anything yet. Renee was there when I cried about it, Carol said. She was the only one who listened. She said she understood. She said family can be unfair sometimes. And then she started asking small questions. I thought she was being kind. She used your pain against you. And I let her. I'd spent 4 years grieving the wife I lost. I'd never once considered that my daughter was grieving something different, not a death, but an erasure. Dorothy had seen Carol clearly. Dorothy had named her the engineer, the builder, the one who should carry the tools forward, and I, in my fog, had handed everything to Danny because he was the son and sons inherit, and I was too broken to read the fine print of my own wife's wishes. Renee had found the crack and poured herself into it. She hadn't recruited Carol with money or threats. She'd recruited her with the one thing Carol was starving for, someone who said, I see you. I didn't do it for the money, Dad. I did it because I was afraid of being left behind again. After Mom died, after you gave everything to Danny, I was afraid there wouldn't be a place for me anymore. And Renee made me feel like there was. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there was always a place for her, that I would never leave her behind. But the words would have been a lie dressed up as comfort. Because the truth was, I had left her behind. Not deliberately, not cruelly, but with the particular blindness of a grieving man who thought he was doing the right thing and never checked. Carol, I'm sorry. She looked at me. Her eyes were red but dry now. She'd run out of tears somewhere between the birthday cards and this moment. Then she reached down beside her chair and lifted a small cardboard box onto the table. It was the size of a shoebox, taped shut, her name written on the outside in a child's handwriting. Wren sent this to me 3 weeks ago, Carol said. There's a letter inside. I opened the box. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, Lined school paper, the kind with the wide margins. Purple-colored pencil. The handwriting was careful, slightly lopsided. The letters of a child who still dots her I's with circles. Wren Calloway, 11 years old, carrying something far too heavy for 5th grade. I unfolded it and read. Grandpa Frank, I heard something scary. Daddy and Mommy were fighting loud. Mommy said, "Don't forget what we did to Grandma when she got in the way." I don't know what that means, but it scared me. Please tell Grandpa. Love, Wren. An 11-year-old girl wrote those words in purple-colored pencil in the handwriting of a child who still drew hearts in the margins of her homework. And she was describing something that could put her own mother in prison for the rest of her life. I read it again, the same words, the same purple ink. Don't forget what we did to Grandma when she got in the way. The kitchen went very still. The clock ticked. The tea Carol had poured sat cold and untouched between us. Something metallic settled in my mouth, the taste of fear, not anger. Because anger has a direction, and this had none. This was the floor dropping out. "Dad," Carol whispered. "What does it mean? What we did to Grandma?" I set Wren's letter on the table next to the email. 2 pieces of paper, one from my son to my daughter requesting forgery materials, one from my granddaughter to my daughter, reporting words she didn't understand but knew were wrong. Between those 2 pages lay the entire distance between what I thought this was and what it might actually be. Fraud, identity theft, forgery, those were crimes with numbers attached, dollars, years, restitution. But what we did to Grandma wasn't about money. Dorothy died of complications from a long illness. That's what the doctors said. That's what I believed. That's what everyone believed. Dorothy's USB drive was still in my shirt pocket. It had been there since Wednesday morning. Whatever she'd recorded, whatever she'd gathered alone in a house full of people who wanted her silent, it was time to hear it. I called Jerry at 10 o'clock at night. He answered on the second ring. "Jerry, bring the USB drive. I left it in your office safe this afternoon. I need to listen to that audio file. Tonight." A pause. "Frank, it's 10 o'clock. Tonight, Jerry." I looked at Carol. "Can you stay?" She nodded. Neither of us was sleeping anyway. Jerry arrived at 10:30 with the USB drive in his breast pocket and the look of a man who'd driven across Nashville in his pajama pants with a sport coat thrown over the top. He didn't comment on Carol being there. He set the drive on the table, sat down, and waited. The 3 of us sat around my kitchen table at 10:30 on a Thursday night, and nobody touched the laptop. Not yet. Because once I pressed play, Dorothy would be in the room again. And none of us were ready for that. I plugged the red USB into the laptop. One audio file appeared on the screen. The file name read, Danny March, 14th, 2019 kitchen, duration 4:37. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long my wife had to confront our son about what she'd seen. Less time than it takes to boil pasta. Enough time to change everything. I pressed play. Dorothy's voice came through the speakers, hoarse the way it had been in her last year, but clear, steady. The voice of a woman who had made a decision and was not going to be talked out of it. "Danny, I saw what Renee did in Dad's study. I saw her photograph his license, his social security card." Danny's voice, younger than I remembered, pitched high with surprise. "Mom, it's not what you think. Don't." One word. The way Dorothy said it shut the conversation down and rebuilt it on her terms. I watched her do it. 2 in the morning, she had his signature sample spread on the desk. The old tax folders. I stood in the hallway for 40 seconds. Don't tell me it's not what I think. A long pause on the recording. I could hear Danny breathing. I could hear the kitchen clock, the same clock ticking 3 feet from where I was sitting now, 4 years later. Listening to a conversation that happened in this room while I slept upstairs. Then Danny broke. "Hey, just give us 6 months, Mom. We'll pay everything back. Dad will never even know. Please. It was Renee's idea. I didn't want to. She said it was just temporary, just one project. 6 months, Danny." Dorothy's voice didn't waver. "Then I go to your father myself. And God help you if you do anything to stop me." The file ended. A soft click, then silence. Dorothy had been dead for 4 years, but her voice in that kitchen sounded stronger than any of ours. She was the bravest person in that recording, the only one who stood her ground, the only one who demanded accountability, and the only one who didn't survive it. Carol was crying silently, both hands flat on the table. Jerry had taken off his reading glasses and set them beside the laptop. I stared at the audio waveform frozen on the screen, a flat line now, like a heart monitor after the patient is gone. She knew, I said to no one in particular. She fought, and she died before she could tell me. Jerry reached for the laptop. There's a second folder on the drive. He clicked it open. Screenshots. Text messages Dorothy had captured from Danny's phone. She must have looked while he was asleep or in the shower, the way a mother does when she knows her child is lying, and the lie might be dangerous. Jerry read them aloud in a flat, careful voice. April 2019, Danny to Renee. She's going to tell him, we need to handle this. Jerry paused. Renee's reply, same night, 11:47 p.m. Leave it to me. Leave it to me. 3 words, 4 syllables. Typed on a phone screen at 11:47 p.m. And 5 months later, my wife was in the ground. Jerry scrolled further. More screenshots dated through the spring. May 2019. Dorothy's health declining rapidly. Notes she'd typed to herself, unusual fatigue, confusion in the afternoons. Lost 4 pounds this week. Something is wrong. June, told Danny I'm getting worse. He seemed relieved. July, can barely walk to the mailbox. Renee brings me tea every afternoon. It tastes different lately. It tastes different lately. I stood up from the table. Not fast, slowly the way you stand when the floor has shifted and you're not sure it will hold. Carol looked up at me with wet eyes. Jerry closed the laptop. Frank, Jerry said. His voice had changed. The lawyer was gone. The friend was back. This USB needs to go to the FBI tomorrow morning. I'll call Sandra Cho before 8. I know. This is no longer just financial fraud. I knew that too. I'd known it since I read Wren's letter in purple pencil. Don't forget what we did to Grandma when she got in the way. But knowing it and hearing it confirmed by your dead wife's own notes, those are different distances from the same truth. Dorothy had documented everything she could before her body failed. She'd recorded her son's confession. She'd captured text messages that laid out a timeline. She'd even noted the tea that tasted different. She'd done all of this alone in a house where the people closest to her didn't want her to talk, while her health crumbled week by week in a pattern that no longer looked like natural decline. The 3 of us sat in that kitchen for a long time after Jerry closed the laptop. Carol cried until she stopped. Jerry folded his hands like a man in church. I looked at Dorothy's photograph on the counter, the same one I'd looked at over morning coffee for 4 years, and I understood finally what her eyes had been trying to tell me. She'd known, she'd fought, she'd prepared evidence and left it with a man she trusted, and someone had made sure she never delivered it herself. Tomorrow morning, I would hand her voice to the FBI and let them finish what she started alone. It was the least I could do. It was 4 years too late. And it was exactly what Dorothy would have expected of me, not because I was brave, but because she'd already done the brave part. I drove Dorothy's USB to the FBI at 8 the next morning. I hadn't slept. Carol hadn't either. She'd gone home at midnight with mascara tracks on her cheeks and a promise to answer her phone whenever I called. Jerry met me in the parking lot with his briefcase and the expression of a man walking into a building he hoped he'd never have to enter. I set the red USB drive on Sandra Cho's white conference table. Such a small thing to carry so much death inside it. Sandra plugged it into her laptop without comment. She listened to Dorothy's audio all 4 minutes and 37 seconds with her hands folded and her eyes on the waveform. She read the text messages. She read Wren's letter in purple pencil. When she finished, she closed the laptop and picked up her desk phone. This is Agent Cho. I need a records review request to the Davidson County Medical Examiner. Case involves a death in September 2019, possible chemical poisoning. I'll send the details within the hour. She hung up and looked at me. Mr. Calloway, with this USB, we have enough to investigate your wife's death as a potential homicide. The medical examiner will review her records and determine whether exhumation is warranted. I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. There's something else I need to ask you, Sandra said. Your son? Based on what I've heard on that recording, Dorothy confronted Danny, not Renee. Danny begged for time. The text exchange afterward was between Danny and Renee, but the reply, the one that concerns us, came from Renee alone. You're asking me if Danny knew what she was going to do. I'm asking you what you think. There's a moment in every investigation when the question changes. It stops being who did this and becomes who can still be saved. That Friday morning, sitting in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, I realized I was asking both. I think my son is guilty of fraud and forgery and identity theft, I said. I think he is weak and selfish, and he let a woman use him as a tool, but I don't think he knew Renee would hurt his mother, The Danny on that recording, the one begging for 6 months, that's a man who thinks the worst that can happen is getting caught, not the worst that can happen to his mother. Sandra studied me for a long time. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Frank, I advise you to speak to your son. Once, before the warrant is issued. Give him a chance to come to us instead of us coming to him. Cooperation will be taken into account, especially if he provides information about Renee. Before I tell you what happened when I made that call, before I describe what it sounds like, when your son's voice breaks on the word mom, I need to ask if you're still with me. If you are, drop your guess in one sentence. Do you think Danny knew what Renee did to Dorothy, or was he blind the way I was? Because what comes next is the moment this story turns. A quick note. The next part includes some recreated details to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson behind it is what I hope stays with you. I sat in the truck outside the FBI office with the engine off and the October sun warming the windshield. I dialed Danny's number. It rang 3 times. "Dad, Danny, I need you to listen very carefully. You have one chance to do the right thing. Just one." Silence. Then, what happened? I found Mom's recording, the one she made in March 2019 in this kitchen, when she confronted you about Renee photographing my credentials. I heard your voice, Danny. I heard you beg her for 6 months. Nothing, just breathing. I also found text messages from April. You wrote to Renee she's going to tell him. "We need to handle this." And Renee wrote back, "Leave it to me." Danny's voice when it came was a sound I will carry for the rest of my life. Not a word, a noise. Something between a gasp and a sob, the kind of sound a man makes when the floor disappears. "Dad, I didn't know she would. I swear to God, I didn't know about Mom." His voice cracked on the word mom, the same way it had when he was 9 years old, and Dorothy came home from the hospital after her first surgery. Some sounds a father never forgets, no matter what that child grows up to do. "I didn't know," he said again. "When I wrote that text handle this, I meant talk to her, convince her. I didn't mean, Dad, you have to believe me. What I believe doesn't matter anymore, Danny. What matters is what you do in the next 12 hours. I told him about the FBI, about Sandra, about the medical examiner reviewing Dorothy's records. I told him the warrants were coming and that cooperation was his only path to anything resembling a future. The FBI is preparing warrants. If you want to cooperate, you have until end of today. FBI Phoenix Field Office, alone, without Renee." Danny said nothing for what felt like a full minute. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand and stared through the windshield at the Nashville skyline. The keys were still in the ignition. My mouth was so dry, I could feel my lips cracking. Then I heard Renee's voice in the background, distant sharp the way it always sounded. "Danny, who's on the phone?" Danny didn't answer her. He answered me. "Look, Dad, where do I go?" I closed my eyes. "FBI Phoenix Field Office. Ask for the duty agent. Tell them Sandra Cho in Nashville sent you. Go alone, Danny. If you bring Renee, the deal is off." I hung up before Renee could hear another word. Then I sat in the truck and let the silence fill the cab, and thought about a 9-year-old boy running down a hospital corridor to hug his mother, and the 35-year-old man who just asked his father for directions to the FBI because he didn't know how to get there on his own. I hung up on Danny and sat in the truck thinking about the sound of Renee's voice in the background, sharp, demanding the voice of a woman who controls the room by controlling the information in it. 2 hours later, Sandra called me back to the FBI office. That kind of callback means the situation got worse while you were trying to breathe. She had her laptop open when I walked in, no pleasantries. She turned the screen toward me. "We've been monitoring Pruitt's personal phone for 72 hours, Sandra said. 47 messages between him and Renee's Arizona number in 2 weeks. She scrolled to a text time-stamped 11:40 p.m. 2 nights earlier. The message was from Renee. "How far is he?" Pruitt's reply came 12 minutes later at 11:52 p.m. He filed at the bank, contacted licensing board. No FBI yet. No FBI yet. He'd typed those 3 words the night before I sat across from Sandra for the first time, which meant that by the time I walked into this building with Dorothy's documents and Tommy's warning, Pruitt had already reported my visit to the bank, my call to Ray, and every other move I'd made. Every piece of evidence I'd handed the detective had been forwarded within hours to the woman who may have killed my wife. Sandra scrolled through more messages. Pruitt reporting my Friday visit to his office. Pruitt confirming I'd brought documents. Pruitt asking Renee, "Does he know about the second LLC?" Renee replying, "Not yet. Keep him talking." Keep him talking. I'd sat in that man's office drinking sour coffee from a styrofoam cup while he pumped me for information and relayed it to Phoenix in real time. A federal warrant for Pruitt's arrest has been approved, Sandra said. Obstruction and conspiracy. He and Renee will be arrested simultaneously. We can't risk one warning the other. Within 48 hours. Frank, I need you to be normal until then. No changes to routine, no calls to Danny that Renee might overhear. Let her think you don't know she's being tracked. Be normal. I drove home and walked into my backyard and picked up a pair of garden shears I had no intention of using. I stood in the October air and pretended to trim a hedge while my phone sat in my pocket like a grenade with the pin half pulled. Be normal. Act like a man who doesn't know his dead wife was poisoned. His son is cooperating with the FBI. His detective is a mole, and the woman behind all of it is checking her phone every 5 minutes in an office 1,500 miles away. Ray called at 4:30. Arizona ROC shut them down, he said, and for the first time in 2 weeks his voice carried something close to relief. $15,000 fine. Every contract under your credentials voided. The dominoes are falling, Frank. I thanked him and hung up. The dominoes were falling, but not fast enough. Because 8 minutes later, Tommy Briggs called from a different number. Mr. Calloway. Tommy's voice was a whisper. He was outside somewhere. I could hear traffic wind the sound of a man who'd stepped out of a building to make a call he didn't want anyone to overhear. Mr. Calloway, Renee is packing. Small suitcase, not the big ones. She sent everyone home at 3. She's been on her phone every 5 minutes, checking something, not calling. Just staring at the screen and then putting it down. A small suitcase. Not the family bags, not the children's things. Just enough for one person traveling light and fast. What kind of mother packs a bag that size? The kind who already decided her children are a cost she's willing to write off. Is Danny there? I asked. Haven't seen him all day. His car's gone. Renee didn't mention him once. I thanked Tommy and told him to go home. Then I called Sandra. She's running. Sandra's voice was calm, the way people sound when the plan is already in motion and the panic belongs to someone else. We know. She booked the ticket 3 hours ago. 6 a.m. Saturday flight Phoenix Sky Harbor to Nassau, Bahamas. One way. One way. I stood in my backyard holding garden shears I'd never used, listening to those 2 words settle into the October air like ash. One way means no return ticket, no plan to come back, no intention of seeing Danny again, or sitting across from Ren at breakfast, or watching Tyler grow up. One way means the performance is over, and the performer is leaving the theater. We have agents at Sky Harbor, Sandra continued. TSA has been notified. She will not board that flight. And Pruitt, simultaneous, 6:15 a.m. Saturday is residence. 3 vehicles. He won't have time to make a call. I set the garden shears on the porch railing and sat down on the steps. The sun was going down over Nashville. The neighborhood was quiet. Someone's sprinkler, a dog barking 2 houses over. The ordinary sounds of a Friday evening in a city that didn't know what was about to happen at dawn. Danny had asked me where to go. I'd told him. Whether he'd actually gone, whether he was sitting in an FBI office in Phoenix right now, or whether Renee had pulled him back into her orbit the way she always did, I didn't know. I wouldn't know until Sandra called. She was never coming back. Not for Danny, not for Ren, not for Tyler, not for the life she'd built on my name and my wife's grave. She was going to fly to the Bahamas with a suitcase and a passport, under a name I'd never heard, and disappear into a country that wouldn't ask questions. Unless the FBI got to the gate first. I went inside and sat in the living room with the lights off. It was going to be a long night, the longest of my life, and all I could do was wait. Sandra called at 9 that Friday night. Danny had walked into FBI Phoenix at 9 o'clock alone without Renee. He'd cooperated fully, but it was what he told them that kept me awake until dawn. The number 89,000 kept blinking on my laptop screen like a pulse. Sandra laid out the escape plan piece by piece. A Cayman Islands bank account opened 18 months ago under Renee Marchand. Her birth name, not her married name, not the Marlowe alias from the passport. A third identity. Tucked away in a country with banking privacy laws built for people who don't want to be found. The money had been transferred in increments that stayed below federal reporting thresholds. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Siphoned from the fraudulent contracts over a year and a half. Danny gave us everything, Sandra said. Her voice had the careful flatness of someone delivering information they know will cause damage. Including 3 CVS receipts for diphenhydramine. 50 milligram capsules, purchased between January and March 2020. I didn't speak. During your wife's illness, Sandra added. Danny said Renee told him they were for her own allergies. Say that again. 3 purchases, January, February, March. Diphenhydramine, an over-the-counter antihistamine. In normal doses, it causes drowsiness. In larger doses, administered consistently over weeks. She stopped. Frank, this is why we're involving the medical examiner. Diphenhydramine. I had to look it up later to understand the full scope of what Sandra was telling me. An antihistamine that sits on every pharmacy shelf in America, available without a prescription. Untraceable in normal toxicology screens, unless you know to look for it. Renee bought it 3 times in 3 months while my wife was dying in the next room. And Danny, my son, who slept under the same roof, believed it was for allergies. What happens at 6 a.m., I asked. She doesn't board that plane. That's all you need to know tonight. I hung up and sat in my home office for a long time. Then I walked into the living room, turned off every light except the small lamp beside Dorothy's chair, and pulled the photo album off the shelf. The album was the old kind leather cover cracked spine adhesive pages with clear plastic overlays. Dorothy had kept it meticulously through 2019, her last good year. I opened it to Carol's birthday party that March, the same month Dorothy caught Renee in my study. In the photograph, Dorothy was smiling, but her eyes were tired. Not sick tired, carrying tired. The exhaustion of a woman who knew something terrible and couldn't find anyone to tell. I'd looked at this photo before, many times. I'd always seen a woman fighting an illness. Tonight I saw a woman fighting something else, entirely fighting it alone, in a house full of people who should have been paying attention. There is a specific kind of silence at 3 in the morning that makes you answer for every question you never asked. The house settles. The refrigerator hums. The clock ticks. And in that silence, every missed signal, every dismissed warning, every moment you chose comfort over truth comes back and sits across from you like a guest who won't leave. Dorothy's eyes in that photograph were asking one question. Why didn't you see it? I turned the pages slowly. Dorothy at Wren's school, play clapping. Dorothy in the garden, kneeling beside the sunflowers she planted every spring. Dorothy at Christmas dinner, the last one. Her hand on Danny's shoulder, while Renee smiled from across the table, the same smile she'd worn at the airport gate. The same stillness. The same absence behind the eyes. Dot, I'm sorry, I said to the photograph. The lamp hummed. The house was empty. I should have looked more closely, at everything, at your eyes, at the pills, at the woman sleeping down the hall from you while you were dying. I sat with her until the sun came up. 7 hours in that chair with the album open on my lap, turning pages I'd turned 100 times before, and seeing them for the first time. 7 hours longer than I sat with her in the hospice on the last night when the nurses said it could be any time, and I held her hand and fell asleep in the chair and woke up to find she was gone. I will carry that failure until they put me in the ground beside her. The cold coffee on the side table had been sitting there since midnight. I hadn't eaten since dinner. My mouth tasted like nothing, the stale emptiness of a man who'd stopped swallowing hours ago because his body had forgotten how. At 5:15, the first gray light touched the curtains. At 5:30, the birds started. At 5:42, I heard a car door somewhere down the street, a neighbor leaving for an early shift. A sound so ordinary it felt like an insult. At 5:47 a.m., the phone vibrated on the armrest. Sandra's name on the screen. I picked it up. I didn't say hello. She didn't need me to. Her voice was steady, unhurried, the way someone sounds when the war is over and the counting hasn't started yet. Frank, we have her. 3 words. I closed my eyes and held the phone against my ear and felt something move through me that wasn't relief and wasn't justice and wasn't grief. It was all 3 at once, braided together so tight I couldn't tell where one ended and the others began. Dorothy's album was still open on my lap. The dawn light was on the curtains. And somewhere in Phoenix, the woman who had stolen my name poisoned my wife and planned to disappear into the Caribbean with $89,000 of stolen money was standing in handcuffs at a gate she would never walk through. I sat in that chair for another 10 minutes before I stood up. Then I closed the album, set it on the shelf, and went to make coffee. The war was over. The counting was about to begin. I asked Sandra one question after she said those 3 words. Did she fight? No, Sandra said. She smiled, like she'd been expecting it, just not this early. That was Renee. Even at the end, even with federal agents closing in at Terminal 4 of Sky Harbor, she performed. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood at the gate 8 minutes before it closed and watched the badges come toward her with the calm of a woman who had already calculated every possible outcome and filed this one under acceptable losses. Sandra walked me through it while I stood in my living room, with dawn light filling the windows, and Dorothy's photo album still open on the couch behind me. FBI and Arizona DPS had intercepted Renee at security at 5:52 a.m. She was carrying a single bag, the small suitcase Tommy had described. Inside, $34,000 in banded hundreds. A passport in the name Renee Patricia Marlowe. Her mother's maiden name, the third identity I'd now learned about. And the one-way ticket to Nassau. She had a whole other life waiting in the Bahamas, Sandra said. Bank account rental agreement, new identity documents. She'd been building it for months. 3 identities. Renee Calloway for the marriage, Renee Marchand for the Cayman account, Renee Marlowe for the escape. 3 names for a woman who was none of them, who wore other people's identities, the way the rest of us wear coats taking them off when the weather changes. She smiled. That's what Sandra said. Renee stood at the gate in handcuffs with $34,000 in her bag and a dead woman's stolen life behind her. And she smiled, not a smirk. Not defiance. The smile of a professional, acknowledging that the game was over and she'd had a good run. She asked for a lawyer before they finished reading her rights, Sandra continued. Not Danny, not the children, a lawyer. Not Ren, not Tyler, not the 7-year-old daughter who wrote letters in purple pencil, or the 4-year-old son who asked for soup. A lawyer. Because to Renee, the children were never people. They were props in a performance that had just closed, and props don't get phone calls. Sandra paused. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from the flat cadence of a case report to something more careful, more human. Pruitt was taken simultaneously. 6:15 a.m., his residence in the Nashville suburbs. 3 vehicles. He opened the door in his bathrobe, saw the badges, and said one word. I figured. 22 years, Pruitt wore that badge. 22 years of service, a pension accommodation on his wall. How many of those years was he for sale? And how many people walked into his office the way I did, trusting him, because the badge said, they should. He gave it all up for a woman he'd dated in Denver a decade ago. A woman who'd positioned him like a chess piece and used him until the board was swept. Charges obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. His phone held the 47 messages Sandra had shown me, every move I'd made reported within hours. He'd known about the bank visit the licensing board, the FBI. He'd known everything except that the FBI was watching him watch me. Gone before breakfast, Sandra said quietly. 22 years gone before breakfast. I stood in the living room and caught my reflection in the dark television screen. Unshaven, hollow-eyed. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. I hadn't eaten since dinner the night before. The stale coffee from midnight was still on the side table, and the morning air came through the cracked window, carrying the smell of October damp leaves, cool earth. The season when things stop growing and start preparing to survive. Sandra let the silence sit for a moment, then her tone shifted again. Not careful this time, gentle. The way you speak to someone before you ask them to do something terrible. Frank, there's one more thing. I gripped the phone with both hands. The medical examiner reviewed Danny's statement. The purchases, the timeline, the details about your wife's decline. She's requesting permission to exhume Dorothy's remains for toxicology testing. The word exhume landed in the room like something dropped from a height. I heard the static hum of the open phone line. I heard the clock in the kitchen ticking. I heard my own breathing, which had become the shallow, measured breathing of a man trying very hard not to break something. You're asking me to dig up my wife. I'm asking you to let us find out if Renee killed her. I looked at Dorothy's album on the couch, still open to the page I'd been staring at for hours. Carol's birthday party, March 2019. Dorothy smiling with tired eyes. The photograph I'd studied all night looking for, what I'd missed looking for, the moment she'd tried to tell me and I hadn't listened. Sandra waited on the line. She didn't push. She didn't repeat the question. She understood that a man being asked to approve the exhumation of his wife needs time to find the floor before he can stand on it. The metallic taste was back in my mouth. The same taste I'd had when Sandra said diphenhydramine. The taste of a truth that your body recognizes before your mind. Does the animal part of you that knows something is poison before the lab confirms it? Yes, I said. Dig her up. I heard Sandra exhale softly. And if you find what I think you'll find, I want to be the one who tells Danny, not an agent, not a prosecutor, me. I want to be the one who tells my son what his wife did to his mother. I understand, Sandra said. I hung up and stood in the living room for a long time. Dorothy's album was behind me. Her photograph was on the counter. Her voice was on a red USB drive that had spent 4 years in a safe. And now, her body, the last of her, the part I'd said goodbye to at the graveside on a September morning, was going to be opened up by strangers looking for something I already knew they'd find. I owed her that much. I owed her everything. Before the exhumation order could be processed, before the lawyers filed their motions, and the medical examiner scheduled her team, I needed to see Dorothy. Not the photograph. Not the album. The place where she was. I brought her a yellow sunflower because she never liked roses. Said they were for people who couldn't think of anything better. I'd brought her sunflowers every visit since the funeral, yellow ones. Tall ones, the kind she planted in the garden every spring because they faced the sun no matter what direction the wind blew. The cemetery was quiet at 8 in the morning. October light came low through the oak trees and laid itself across the headstone in long gold stripes. Dorothy Ann Calloway. The dates. The words I'd chosen, beloved wife, mother, builder of better things. I'd picked that last part because she would have hated anything sentimental. She built things, gardens, meals, children. A marriage that lasted 35 years. She would have wanted that on the stone. I set the sunflower against the granite and put my hand on the top of the headstone. The stone was cold. October, cold. The kind of cold that reminds you the person underneath isn't coming back no matter how many flowers you bring. They need to open the ground, Dot, I said. I know what that means, but if she did what I think she did, you deserve the truth more than you deserve the quiet. The wind moved through the oaks and tilted the sunflower against the granite. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the stone, listening to the silence that cemeteries are made of, not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything that can't be said anymore. I called Sandra from the cemetery path. Permission granted, do it right. She earned that much. Sandra said she'd file the order Monday morning. I hung up and stood on the gravel path and breathed the damp cemetery air mineral green. The smell of turned earth and cut grass and things growing over things that are gone. My phone buzzed again. Carol. Dad, don't hang up. Her voice was cracking. Not crying, cracking the way a voice sounds when the crying happened hours ago and what's left is the raw wood underneath. I need to talk to you, not about Renee, about me, about turning myself in. My daughter said turning myself in. The way other people say going to the dentist, matter of fact, already past the fear, just wanting the pain to start so it could eventually stop. She'd been up all night. She'd called a lawyer. She'd made a decision, and she was calling me not for permission, but for company. Come to the house, I said. She arrived at noon. I poured coffee that neither of us drank, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Wren's letter, where I'd listened to Dorothy's recording, where every truth in this story had landed like a stone dropped from a height. Carol didn't ease into it. She sat down, put her hands flat on the table, the way I do when I'm steadying myself, and said what she'd come to say. I knew it wasn't just paperwork, Dad. I knew. The signature samples, the license dates, I knew it went beyond what Renee told me. But she said if I helped, she'd make sure I wasn't left out. Because Mom's will was going to leave me less than Danny. I didn't speak. The kitchen clock ticked. After Mom died, after you gave the tools to Danny, I was so afraid of being alone. Afraid there wouldn't be a place for me. And Renee was the only one who said she understood. Renee had found the one crack in Carol's armor, the quiet terror of a daughter who watched her mother die, and realized the family might not hold together without her, the fear of being left behind. Overlooked, erased, and Renee had poured herself into that crack the way she poured herself into every vulnerability she found, not with force but with patience, with listening, with the precise cruelty of someone who studies your wound before she uses it. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Dad. I'm asking you to let me fix it before they come for me, the way they came for Renee. Carol's perfume reached me from across the table, the same brand Dorothy wore. Carol had started wearing it after the funeral, I'd noticed, but never said anything, because saying it would have meant acknowledging that my daughter was trying to carry her mother forward in the only way she knew how. And I wasn't ready for that conversation. I was ready now. Carol, what did your lawyer say? She said voluntary surrender and full cooperation are the best options I have. She said the FBI will take it into account. She said I should bring everything I know. And you're going to do that. Monday morning, first thing. I looked at my daughter across the table. Her eyes were red but dry. Her hands were flat on the wood, steady the way mine get when the shaking is happening on the inside. She was 38 years old, and she was sitting in her father's kitchen asking for the one thing she'd been afraid to ask for since Dorothy died. Not forgiveness, not money, not approval. Just someone to walk beside her. I stood up. I walked around the kitchen table slowly, the way you move when you're carrying something heavy and you don't want to drop it. I put my hand on Carol's shoulder. It was small under my palm, bony, shaking slightly though she was trying hard to hide it. I stood there and said nothing until the crying stopped. It took a long time. The clock ticked, the coffee went cold, the kitchen held its breath. When she finally looked up, her eyes were Dorothy's eyes. Same color, same stubbornness, same need to be told it wasn't too late. Carol, I'm going with you. Carol walked into the FBI office Monday morning with her lawyer and her spine straight and her chin up. I walked beside her. Sandra met us at the elevator. Carol cooperated fully. That was October. By March, the courtrooms were ready. The judge said 22 years, and Renee didn't blink. She stood at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with the same stillness she'd had at the airport. Gait as if she'd left her body a long time ago and was just waiting for the rest of us to notice. I sat in the third row of the Phoenix Federal Courthouse behind the prosecutor's table, gripping the armrest of a wooden seat that had been polished by thousands of hands that had gripped it the same way. The courtroom was wood-paneled and fluorescent lit, dust motes floating in the long rectangles of light from the high windows. Renee stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her attorney beside her, and she listened to the charges the way a person listens to a weather report for a city they no longer live in. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and the fourth count, the one that had changed everything. On count 4, the judge said manslaughter in the second-degree death by chemical sedation of Dorothy Ann Calloway. This court sentences the defendant to 12 years to run consecutively with the previous counts. 22 years total, no parole. The gavel came down once a single-strike final, the sound of a door closing on a life that had been built entirely on lies. I waited for relief, for justice, for something that felt like an ending. Instead, I felt the weight of every year I'd spent trusting the wrong person settle onto my shoulders like wet concrete. 22 years of prison for Renee, 4 years of marriage to my son, 3.5 years of fraud, 5 months of poisoning my wife. The numbers added up on paper. They didn't add up to anything that felt like enough. Renee turned briefly toward the gallery as the marshals approached. She didn't look at me. She looked past me at no one in particular and said 4 words. She was already dying. 4 words spoken without emotion, without defense, without apology. She was already dying, as if Dorothy's illness made the poisoning incidental. As if accelerating a death that was already coming didn't count. As if the woman who fought alone in a house full of people who wanted her silent had been dying anyway. So, what difference did a few milligrams make? Every person in that courtroom understood exactly what kind of woman we'd been dealing with all along. Not a criminal who felt remorse. Not a con artist who regretted getting caught. A predator who felt inconvenienced. The marshals let her out. The courtroom emptied slowly. I sat in my seat until the room was nearly clear, then walked into the hallway and bought a cup of vending machine coffee that tasted burnt and bitter and exactly right for the occasion. I was standing by the window looking out at the Phoenix sun baking the parking lot when a man in a worn sport coat approached me, thin frame, mid-60s, the careful posture of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Mr. Calloway. He extended his hand. I'm Gerald Whitmore. She did the same thing to me in 2014. Different state, different name, same playbook. You stopped her. That's something I couldn't do. Gerald Whitmore, 62. The man from the Colorado case file Sandra had shown me months ago, Renee's first victim. The small construction company owner in Denver, who lost everything and never rebuilt. He'd driven from Boulder to Phoenix to watch the sentencing of the woman who had destroyed his life 8 years before she started on mine. We sat down on a wooden bench in the courthouse hallway. The bench was cool under my palms. Gerald's handshake had been firm, but thin-boned, the grip of a man who'd lost weight he never gained back. How many Gerald Whitmores were out there? Men and women sitting in empty kitchens eating dinner alone because Renee had moved through their lives like a brush fire and left nothing standing. How many people had trusted a smile and a handshake and a story about military precision and handed over their savings to a woman who wore identities like costumes? I didn't stop her fast enough, Gerald. My wife is dead. Gerald nodded slowly. Mine left. Said she couldn't trust a man who got fooled that badly. 8 years ago. I still eat dinner alone. We sat with that for a while. 2 men on a bench in a courthouse hallway, connected by the same woman and the same wound, separated by 8 years and 1,000 miles. Gerald had his hands on his knees. I had mine on the bench. Phoenix heat leaked through the lobby doors, and the disinfectant smell of the courthouse mixed with Gerald's drugstore aftershave. You said something to Sandra, I told him. She passed it along. You said Renee targets men who love their families too much to see what's right in front of them. That's right. You were right. I looked at my hands. I did see it, Gerald. The signs were there, all of them. Dorothy tried to tell me. My gut told me something was off the day I met Renee at the wedding. I just chose not to believe it because believing it meant my son married a monster, and I wasn't ready for that. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. Not to Sandra, not to Jerry, not to Carol. To a stranger on a bench, a man who understood, because he'd made the same choice and paid the same price. Gerald shook my hand one more time and walked out of the courthouse into the Phoenix sun. I watched him go, thin shoulders worn coat. A man who'd been alone for 8 years because of the same woman who was now starting her 22. I sat on that bench for a long time, thinking about what I'd just admitted. I did see it. I chose not to. And now I had to go home and figure out how to live with a family that was still standing barely because I'd waited too long to look. I flew home from Phoenix carrying the weight of what I'd admitted on that courthouse bench. I chose not to see. Those 5 words sat in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed and couldn't pass. But the courtrooms weren't done with me yet. 3 courtrooms in 6 weeks. That's how long it takes to dismantle a family and price every piece of the wreckage. Danny's sentencing came first back in Phoenix. He stood at the defense table in a gray suit someone had brought him. Not his own, not the right size, the suit of a man whose life no longer fit. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and the measured voice of someone who has delivered bad news so many times it sounds like weather. The court recognizes your cooperation, Mr. Calloway. It does not erase your participation. 4 years federal imprisonment, with eligibility for parole at 18 months upon verified restitution of $340,000. 4 years. Danny looked at me from the defense table. No words, no plea. Just a nod the kind soldiers give each other when there's nothing left to say and the orders have already come down. I'd taught him that nod. He'd learned it watching me come home from the army, watching me shake hands with foremen on job sites, watching me stand at Dorothy's graveside without breaking. He used it now because it was the only language we had left. I nodded back. It was enough. Pruitt's hearing was in Nashville 2 weeks later. He showed up in a rumpled suit with his attorney beside him and his eyes on the floor. He never looked up, not during the charges, not during the plea, not when the judge said 3 years and forfeiture of pension. Pruitt stared at the floor through his entire sentencing, like a man watching his reflection sink in dark water. 22 years of service, a badge, a commendation, a pension that was supposed to carry him into old age, all of it draining through the cracks he'd made himself. He'd sold it for a woman he dated in Denver a decade ago, and the price turned out to be everything he had. 3 years, badge gone, pension gone, and the 47 text messages entered into evidence so the court record would show exactly how many times he'd betrayed the oath he swore. Carol's hearing was the hardest to sit through. Not because the sentence was severe, it wasn't. Because of what the judge said before delivering it. Ms. Calloway, your voluntary surrender and full cooperation are noted by this court. 3 years supervised probation, 500 hours community service, $28,000 restitution. The judge paused, removed her glasses, and looked at Carol directly. This court does not take lightly the courage it took to walk in before you were called. Many people in your position would not have done so. Carol stood straight. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She didn't cry. She listened to every word the way you listen to a diagnosis, not the one you hoped for, but the one you'd already accepted. I had watched 3 people I'd known for years stand in 3 courtrooms and hear 3 judges tell them the price of what they'd done. My son, a detective, my daughter. Each sentence carried a number, years, dollars, hours, as if the damage could be quantified on a ledger. And not one of those numbers came close to what Dorothy paid. Dorothy's price was her life, and no courtroom could charge for that, because the defendant had already been sentenced and the victim couldn't testify. I drove home to Nashville after Carol's hearing, with a cup of drive-through coffee going cold in the console and the May sun cutting through the windshield. The highway stretched flat and long, and I drove it the way I'd driven everything for the past 7 months, hands at 10 and 2 eyes forward, steady. Because if I loosened my grip on anything, the rest would follow. When I pulled into the driveway, Ren and Tyler were sitting on the porch. Carol was standing behind them, one hand on each of their shoulders. She'd picked them up from the temporary placement and brought them here while I was in court. Ren's legs dangled off the step. Tyler was holding a plastic dinosaur. The Nashville porch in May smelled like cut grass and warm concrete, and something I hadn't smelled in a long time, the ordinary air of a house where children are waiting. I got out of the truck with the car keys still in my hand. I hadn't thought about what I would say. I hadn't rehearsed anything. I'd spent 7 months planning, investigating, confronting, testifying. I'd sat through 3 sentencings without flinching, but nothing in any of that had prepared me for a 7-year-old girl with Dorothy's brown eyes looking up at me from my own porch. "Grandpa, is it over?" I knelt down on the porch boards. My knees cracked. I put my hands on her shoulders, small, bony, trembling, slightly under her t-shirt. The shoulders of a child who had heard too many arguments through too many walls and understood more than anyone her age should have to. "The court part is over, sweetheart. The hardest part is..." Tyler tugged my sleeve. 4 years old, holding a green brontosaurus, no understanding of courtrooms or sentences, or the word restitution. He looked up at me with the uncomplicated need of a child who knows exactly one thing he wants. "It's Grandpa, can we have soup?" I looked at Tyler. I looked at Ren. I looked at Carol standing behind them, with her hand still on Ren's shoulder, wearing Dorothy's perfume, carrying Dorothy's stubbornness. Trying to be the mother these children needed while she served her own sentence in the only way the court allowed. I never finished the sentence. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the hardest part isn't something you say, it's something you do. You stand up, you walk inside, you make soup. "Yeah, buddy," I said, "let's have soup." I never finished the sentence. The hardest part, I still don't know what I was going to say. But Tyler wanted soup, so I stood up, walked inside, and made soup. That night, the house had children in it for the first time since Dorothy died, and somehow that was enough of an answer. The phone rang every Sunday at exactly 10:15 a.m., prison schedules turn, even apologies into punctuation, and the first thing Danny always said was the same 5 words. "How are the kids, Dad?" Every week, same question. Same flat click of the automated system before his voice came through, same recorded warning that the call originated from a federal correctional facility. I'd hold the receiver while Tyler babbled about cartoons and Ren told him about school, 30 minutes for the kids, then 15 for me. The first few Sundays were careful. Danny asked about the weather, about the house, about whether I'd fixed the gutter over the garage. Safe questions, the kind you ask when the real ones are too heavy to lift. I answered them the way I'd answer a stranger at a hardware store, polite, brief. The receiver would be warm by the time the kids handed it to me, 45 minutes of use pressing heat into the plastic. By August, the questions changed. "Tyler drew you a picture," I told him one Sunday. "Ren made honor roll. They're fine, Danny, they're fine." Silence on the line. Not the silence of a bad connection. The silence of a man deciding whether to say something that can't be taken back. "Do you think Mom would forgive me?" I set my coffee down. Black strong, the way I drink it during calls, I know will cost me something. The kitchen light was coming through the window at the angle Dorothy used to call church light, low and golden, and landing on things like it meant to bless them. He wasn't asking about the fraud. He wasn't asking about the money or the forged licenses or the shell companies. He was asking about the sedatives, about what Renee had done to Dorothy under his roof, about what he'd known or suspected and never stopped. "She forgave you from the start," I said. That was always her problem and her best quality. I heard him breathe, one long exhale, the kind that carries a year of silence out of a man's chest. Then the automated voice cut in 2 minutes remaining, and we said goodbye, the way prisoners and their families do, fast incomplete, with everything important still sitting in the space between the words. Carol started coming on Thursdays. She'd finished her community service hours early, all 500 of them. Logged at a financial fraud victim center in Nashville, where she spent her days helping people fill out the same kind of paperwork her own case had generated. She never talked about it. She'd show up at my kitchen door around 8 in the morning, pour herself a cup from the pot I'd already made, and sit across from me at the table where Dorothy used to sit. If you've ever sat across from someone you love and said the words, "I'm angry at your choice, not at you," yet that you know it's the hardest sentence in the English language because both of you know the line between the two is thinner than you're pretending. I said it to her on a Thursday in October. She was holding her mug with both hands, careful, deliberate the way you hold something when you're afraid of breaking one more thing. She was wearing Dorothy's perfume. I don't think she knew I noticed. I noticed every time. I'm angry at your choice, Carol, not at you. There's a difference and I need you to hear it. She set the mug down, not slammed placed with the kind of precision that costs effort. She looked at me with Dorothy's stubbornness in her jaw and said nothing. She didn't need to. The fact that she kept coming back on Thursdays was her answer. The fact that I kept making the coffee was mine. We sat in the Thursday morning silence, just spoons and breathing and the sound of a house learning to hold two people who hadn't figured out how to talk to each other yet but had decided to keep showing up until they did. The card arrived on a Tuesday in December. The mail slot rattled and I found it on the floor between a utility bill and a furniture catalog, a cream-colored envelope with blue handwriting I didn't recognize. A handwritten card from a woman I'd spoken to once, thanking me for a phone call I barely remembered making, and somehow it weighed more than every courtroom verdict combined. Dear Mr. Calloway. The card read, You called me on the worst day I'd had in years and told me the truth. You didn't have to. Most people would have stayed out of it. My kitchen is finished now. A good contractor did it. I thought you should know. Eleanor Gibbs. The widow whose renovation contract had been handled by the same outfit Danny and Renee had been running. I'd called her during the worst week of my life, not because I had the energy, not because anyone asked me to, but because Dorothy would have. Dorothy always said showing up is the only thing that counts. I read the card twice. The paper was thick textured, chosen with care, the kind of stationery a woman picks out when she means what she's writing. It smelled faintly of ink and paper and intention. I walked to the kitchen shelf and picked up Dorothy's photo. The one from 2019, her smiling with tired eyes, the last good picture before she got sick. I opened the metal clip on the frame and slid Eleanor's card into the corner. Two faces now. Dorothy's smile and Eleanor's handwriting in blue ink, both saying the same thing in different languages. Someone had done one good thing. One good thing, I said to the photo. At least there was one good thing. The kitchen was quiet. Soup was on the stove, chicken and rice, the meal that had become our family's shorthand for, we're still here. The children were upstairs, Wren was doing homework. Tyler was building something out of blocks that he'd show me before bed, and for the first time in 14 months, the house felt like it was holding together instead of falling apart. Holding together is not the same as healed. I knew that. A house can stand with cracked joists and a patched foundation. I'd inspected enough of them, over 40 years, to know the difference between stable and sound. But stable was enough for now. Stable meant the children slept through the night, and the coffee was hot by 7. Tyler held the ruler upside down and told me the board was -4 inches. And for the first time in 2 years, I laughed hard enough to feel it in my chest. He was standing on a step stool at my garage workbench, tongue poking out both hands, gripping the ruler like it might escape. 5 years old, and convinced he was ready to build a birdhouse. The garage smelled like sawdust and machine oil, and the warm metal of tools that had been hanging in the same spot since before he was born. The radio was on low, some country station Dorothy used to tolerate, and I'd never bothered to change. First you measure twice, I said. Then you cut once. Why twice? Because if you cut wrong, you can't uncut. He stared at the ruler, flipped it right side up, and measured the board again. His small hands held the metal edge the way I'd shown him, thumbs on top, fingers flat underneath. I adjusted his grip once. His fingers were warm and sticky with the peanut butter he'd eaten 20 minutes ago, and I let him figure out the numbers on his own. Wren was sitting on the tool chest behind us, homework spread across the lid math from the look of it. She'd been doing that lately, carrying her schoolwork into whatever room I was in, not asking for help, just choosing to be near. She looked up from her notebook and watched Tyler squint at the ruler. Grandpa, is that how you do everything? What do you mean? As measure twice. Is that how you do everything in life? I set the protractor down. Its cool plastic edge clicked against the workbench. I looked at Wren, 8 years old, Dorothy's brown eyes asking a question that deserved a real answer. I wish I always did that, sweetheart. I really wish I did. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. Maybe she did. Children who've lived through what she'd lived through learn to read the spaces between words the way other kids learn to read books. Measure twice cut once I'd been telling apprentices that for 40 years, and it took my own son's arrest to teach me I'd never once applied it to the people I loved. I'd trusted without measuring. I'd handed over my name, my license, my reputation without checking the cut. And the board had splintered in ways I was still cleaning up. The Sunday call came early that week. 9:45 instead of 10:15. I picked up on the second ring and heard the automated recording. Then Danny's voice, and it had an edge I hadn't heard since the sentencing. Dad, parole board moved my review up. My counselor says the restitution payments are on schedule. I might be home by Christmas. I sat down on the garage stool. Tyler was still measuring his board. Ren's pencil had stopped moving. That's good news, Danny. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know that. But I want to be there for the kids, for you. One step at a time, I said. Measure twice. He laughed. A real laugh, not the careful hollow sound he'd made in the first months. A laugh that sounded like the son I remembered before Renee, before the shell companies, before everything cracked. October came, and I did something I hadn't planned. At 6:12 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, I sat down at the kitchen table in the same chair at the same spot. At the same time, the phone had rung 1 year ago and started all of this. The kitchen looked the same angle of autumn light through the window, same worn spot where my palms rested on the wood, same empty chair across from me where Dorothy used to sit and now nobody did. 1 year ago, I sat here and the world cracked open. Tonight I sat here on purpose because you don't heal by avoiding the places where it happened. You heal by choosing to sit there anyway. The phone didn't ring. No emergency, no detective with bad news. No son calling from a number I didn't recognize. Just a man at a table measuring what was left. Dorothy exonerated by toxicology. Renee serving her sentence. Danny cooperating, paying restitution, earning his way toward a door that might open by winter. Carol rebuilding, still coming on Thursdays. Still wearing Dorothy's perfume, still not talking much, but talking more than she used to. My contractor's license cleared by federal court and restored to the name it belonged to. The name I'd earned. The soup was on. Chicken and rice. The meal that meant we're still here. Carol called at 7. Dad, Ren got accepted. Vanderbilt Engineering Summer Camp. Full scholarship. Her voice was bright and breaking at the same time. The way voices get when they're carrying good news across a long stretch of bad road. She told them she wants to build things like her grandpa. Thus, I didn't say anything for a moment. I sat in the chair where everything had fallen apart and held the phone and let those words land. Build things like her grandpa. Dorothy would have said that was the best sentence in the English language. She would have been right. I looked at Dorothy's photo on the shelf. Eleanor's card still clipped into the frame, blue ink on cream paper. 2 women. One who wrote a thank you note, and one who taught me that showing up is the only thing that counts. She wants to build things, I said to the photo. Like me. The soup was on. The children were upstairs. And this time, I finished the sentence. I finished the sentence. And once I did, I realized the hardest part was never the words it was earning the right to say them. It took me 2 years, 3 courtrooms, and 1 granddaughter's acceptance letter to understand that. But there was one more conversation I needed to have, and the person I needed to have it with couldn't answer back. 5 years is long enough to forget a voice, but not long enough to stop hearing it. Dorothy still corrects my grammar every time I talk to her headstone. I drove to Nashville City Cemetery on a Saturday morning in September, with a bundle of yellow sunflowers on the passenger seat. Not roses. She hated roses. Said they were for people who couldn't think of anything better. Sunflowers were her favorite tall plane, turning toward whatever light was available. That was Dorothy. I remembered that at least. I remembered that. The headstone was warm under my palm. Warmer than the first time I'd come here, back when the granite was new, and the ground was still soft from the burial. September light fell low and golden across the cemetery grass. And the oaks along the fence line moved in a wind that smelled like fresh-cut grass and turned earth, and the faint sweetness of the sunflower petals I set against the base. The report came back. I said it the way I say everything to her now out loud, standing straight hands at my sides. The way you report to someone who outranks you. Low-dose lorazepam, 4 months. She was giving it to you 1 milligram at a time, while I was downstairs watching the evening news and thinking you were just tired. I stopped. The air tasted clean and mineral, the way cemetery air always does, as if the ground is filtering everything down to what's essential. You tried to tell me something was wrong. You said you felt foggy. You said the tea tasted different, and I told you to rest. I told you it was probably the new medication. The wind moved through the oaks. Same trees, same sound, same woman under the ground who deserved better than the man standing above it. I'm sorry I wasn't there, I'm sorry I didn't see it. If someone you love is dying and something feels wrong, Not medically wrong, but humanly wrong. The kind of wrong that sits in your gut and whispers at 3 in the morning. Say it out loud. Say it to someone. Say it now. Because silence is the only thing predators need from you. Renee needed my silence, and I gave it to her for free. I gave it to her because I trusted my son's wife the way you trust the foundation of a house you built yourself, without checking, without measuring, without imagining it could crack. I set my hand on the headstone one more time. The granite held the September sun. They forgot to tell me when they moved, I said. I made sure they never forgot the lesson that followed. I turned and walked back to the truck. The sunflowers stayed, yellow against gray, Dorothy against everything that tried to erase her. The garage was warm when I got home. Late afternoon light came through the side window and landed on the shelf where I keep the things that matter. My Army Medal of Valor, the Silver Star. Dorothy's photo with Eleanor's card still clipped into the frame, and the frame GC license that the federal court had cleared and returned to the name it belonged to. My name. 4 objects in a row on a dusty shelf in a Nashville garage, and together they told the whole story of a man who'd built things, lost things, and learned the difference between the two. The medals on that shelf weren't mine anymore. They belonged to the house, to the workshop, to the 2 children who would grow up knowing that the man who earned them also made mistakes, and that the mistakes didn't erase the medals or the other way around. A life isn't one thing, it's the whole shelf. Tyler was at the workbench. He'd climbed onto the step stool by himself, set a scrap board on the surface, and was holding the ruler the right way numbers. Up edge flat thumbs, on top. He measured the board, wrote the number on the wood with a pencil stub, then moved the ruler back to the starting mark and measured again. "Twice, Grandpa," he said without looking up. "I did it twice." "Good man." Wren was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the tool chest, a sheet of graph paper on a clipboard, sketching something with the quiet intensity Dorothy carried into everything she touched. Her pencil lines were precise. Her grip was firm and practiced. She didn't look up. "Grandpa, do you think Grandma would have liked what I'm building?" I looked at her drawing. A structure walls a roofline dimensions penciled in at the margins. Not a child's sketch. A builder's. "Why, she would have told you to make the foundation deeper," I said. "Then she would have bragged about it to everyone at church." Wren smiled, the same smile Dorothy used to give me when I said something she already knew, but needed to hear anyway. The garage smelled like sawdust and machine oil, and the last of the September heat fading into the first cool edge of fall. The radio played low same station Dorothy used to tolerate in the kitchen. Tyler measured his board. Wren drew her building, and I stood between them with my coffee going cold in my hand, watching my son's children, my wife's grandchildren, do the only thing I'd ever taught anyone to do: build. A man is not measured by what he gives his children. He is measured by what he teaches them to build for themselves. That's the identity no one can steal. Not a license, not a name on a contract, not a number in a database. The real one, the one that passes hand to hand in a garage on a Saturday afternoon, lives in the things you build and the people you teach to build them. Tyler looked up at me. Wren kept her head down. The soup was on. And this time, there was nothing left unfinished. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I gave my son everything: my trust, my time, my name, and I never once stopped to ask what he was doing with it. I measured every board twice on every job site for 40 years. But I never measured the people closest to me. Don't make my mistake. Don't let love blind you to what's happening under your own roof. This family story taught me something I wish I'd learned before it cost me so much. The people who hurt you the worst aren't strangers. They're the ones you'd never think to question. But I also learned that what you build with your own hands with honesty and patience can't be stolen forever. A license can be restored. A name can be cleared. And the ones who are supposed to be in your life are the ones worth keeping. They show up on Thursday mornings with coffee and don't need to say a word. I believe God put me through this for a reason, not to break me, but to show me that the only identity that matters is the one you pass down hand to hand in a garage on a Saturday afternoon. That's the family story no courtroom can take from you. If this family story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your own life, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my place. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already subscribed to Revenge Dad so you don't miss the next one, thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were adjusted for storytelling and privacy. The heart of it, the lesson is, what I hope stays with you. Take care of yourselves.